All right, it looks like it's pretty stable. The numbers kept going up there for a second, but I think most folks are in the room. And, if you're joining, let us know where you're from. It's always great to know who else is watching and who else is engaged in the work. I'm Dreama Gentry, Executive Director of Partners for Education here at Berea College. And this day is always one of my most fun days of the month because I have a chance to talk about college access and success with folks that are doing that work in different places across the country. And all of us know that, we've been doing college access a long time, but we had to really innovate and change how we do things in March, when COVID, the pandemic, landed upon us. I do think it's been interesting that the work is the same. It's how we do it changes. And so I've been thinking a lot about how we've changed our work here in Kentucky and talking to others around the country that also had to change how they reach students and how they continue to inspire young people. So I invited a couple of folks to join me today to talk about what they're doing and how they innovated their work in their rural part of the country. So I want to welcome Steve and Paige today. So Steve, let's start with you. Just introduce yourself and your role, but tell us why rural and where are you from? We always start with that. Rural people always want to know where you come from.
Exactly. Well, good morning, everybody. I am originally from a town in Oklahoma. I saw we have somebody here from Oklahoma called Lawton. And while it's like the fourth biggest city in Oklahoma, it's only, 125,000 or so. It backs up to a military base, an artillery training post for the U.S. Army. So I've never been in the Army, but all my friends moved away every 4 years. So I kind of have that feel about me. So I'm from that little town. It's functionally the desert. There's not a lot going on there. We got rattlesnakes and scorpions though. But I now live and work in Southwest Missouri. At Ozarks Technical Community College. I am the Director of High School Student Success. OTC, as a community colleges are dedicated to serving the communities in which they are located and by providing open access to education. So this project is born out of that desire to serve the rural students that are all around us. Springfield, Missouri is, I would call a relatively large town. A very small city, but we have a lot of small towns around us. This program got started in the Branson, Missouri area. So we have embedded 4 high school college and career advisors at Branson, Hollister, Forsyth, and Reed Spring high schools. This area of Missouri is an interesting mix of a lot of high poverty areas right next to like lakefront properties. And so we have a couple of our schools that are very under-resourced, don't have a lot of college going culture going, but they're interested in developing that. And a couple of our high schools really have some pretty good property taxes going on and they're pretty well resourced. And so we have this interesting dichotomy of serving students whose parents went to college and they own, multiple houses, right next to people who their parents never had interest in going to college. They don't know why they would go to college. And so it's a fun mix of trying to bring this awareness of the importance of a post-secondary education to students that have mixed opinions about what college is. This project in particular, I like to say we're not secret spies for OTC. These embedded high school advisors really help students go to whatever post-secondary goal will meet their long-term goal. So in the eyes of our funder and this project, we are trying to get students to go to a 4-year college or university, a 2-year community college, a technical or trade school, or military service. The information we've founded this project on shows that any of those 4 post-secondary attainments yield a sustainable lifestyle. So that's the goal of this project. We seek to serve those students that are around here that as a community college, they might not know the importance of post-secondary work. So we try to bring that to everybody that lives around us.
Great, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We also have Paige with us. Paige, why rural for you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do. And I love your background, so you're going to have to talk about your background.
Sure thing. So I grew up in a small town called Kingsville, Texas. I lived there until I was about 8 years old, and then we moved to Springfield, Missouri for family. So I spent ages 8 to 18 in Springfield. I went to one of the biggest high schools here in town. I'm a first generation student. My parents didn't care very much about college. I didn't feel very supported. If it wasn't for my best friend who was a year older than me, I wouldn't have known anything about going to college. So I see myself in so many of the students that I work with. I ended up going to Mizzou, the University of Missouri-Columbia, when I graduated high school in 2012, and I graduated from there in 2016 with my bachelor's to become a middle school social studies teacher. But based on some experiences that I had while I was at Mizzou, I decided that I wanted to be a part of education, but I didn't really want to be in the classroom as a teacher role. And so I just happened upon a Facebook post actually for the Missouri College Advising Corps, which is part of the National College Advising Corps branch. And I began my post-secondary work of college access in 2016 in the fall at New Madrid, Missouri. So it was so funny. I remember when they called to tell me that I had the job to become a college advisor, and they said New Madrid, and I was like, I don't even think that second one is a word. Like, I had never heard of New Madrid before. And it wasn't until someone said earthquake, I was like, oh, okay, now I got that part. But I had to look it up on a map. I saw that it was on the complete opposite side of Springfield. I'd never even been to Illinois before. I mean, it's like right there. And I was just like, I don't know if I can do this, but the job sounds so interesting. You know, even though I grew up in a town of about 20,000 people or so, I don't really remember what it was like to live rural. You know, you're just so young, it doesn't really matter to you. So for me, I grew up in an urban place. You know, Springfield's like almost 200,000 people. So my shift to New Madrid was quite interesting, but I fell in love with it very quick. And it was really my passion for post-secondary access that really drove me to fit into my school culture. I didn't even know that I cared about going to college because personally I didn't have the best time at Mizzou. I was always a very educational focused student and loved everything that I did, but I just, if I could go back knowing what I know about doing, you know, best fit, best match colleges, Mizzou was not the one for me. But I'm very proud to say that I went there, you know, no qualms against Mizzou at all. I'm very proud to be a Mizzou alum. But it's just interesting to see, knowing what I know now, all of the different paths that I could have taken in life. And so I really take that approach when I'm working with my students. So I did 2 years with Missouri College Advising Corps, and then I got the wonderful opportunity to be here as a student success advisor through OTC. And so this is my 4th year as an advisor. So what I started at New Madrid was I started college awareness because they had no idea really, you know, SEMO is over there, Southeastern Missouri State, and that's about the only college that they had heard of. And so I was like, well, I wonder if I could, I'm a decorator. So I was like, I wonder if I could decorate my office and like have students ask questions about pennants. And so in 2016, I sent out an email to like 70 colleges or something and was like, hey, you know, if you have any swag items to donate or any pennants, especially, like I would really love to put them up in my office. Like I'm a brand new advisor. And I just received an overwhelming response. So I've now done that all 4 years. I finally finished this wall yesterday, actually. And so I'm really proud of that. I've got some more over here, but they're my smaller pennants. But students, whenever they come in, that's the first thing they see because my door is right over here. And they're just like, whoa, like I didn't know there were so many colleges, or they'll see a name and ask me a question about it. So it's just really cool to get that conversation going. It's not just about colleges in Missouri or even in our like tri-state region, it's everywhere, you know, so it's just helping students find those goals.
Well, it's a great backdrop, and I promise I will send you a Berea College banner because I don't see a Berea College banner. And you'll have to like drop your email address into the chat. And if there's any other college folks that are on and watching this, they need to connect with you and send you banners too, because it does brighten it up. So Steve, it's interesting how Ozarks Technical and Community College made the decision to do this. So share the story of how you all decided to do this initiative, the partners that made it possible. Most of my experience has been through federally funded grants that are doing this type of work through a Gear Up or an Upward Bound or a Talent Search. Yours is a little different. So give us some of the history.
Yeah, so OTC, I know it's Ozarks Technical Community College. There's an extra C in there, but we just leave that out for some reason. So OTC recently decided that our strategic initiative #1 was to provide better advising support for students. So that's our college's #1 strategic goal through 2025. And in doing that, we needed to make the move from a reactive advising model where students get help if they show up and ask for it to a proactive advising model. And so we are making that change now, but we wanted to try to figure out how to do that well before we just dive right in and started doing it. So we partnered up with the Rooted Alliance. They have a couple of their founding members are from rural Missouri, and they were interested in investing some philanthropic dollars into providing specifically high school advising proactively to students in rural Missouri. So OTC has really good positive relationships with those 4 high schools that I mentioned earlier because of our Table Rock campus down there. And so we thought it would be a great place to try this out to see if we could do some proactive advising on the high school level, and then we could learn how to do proactive advising well and institute that college-wide. So yeah, we partnered up with them. They are an external funder that they've set up to fund us for at least 3 years. And then we're looking at partnerships to continue that on. And we've actually recently expanded to another school district, so it's going very well. But so when we started with this, their objective was to assist these rural students with post-secondary education because some statistics they shared with us was that 32% of high school students are from rural communities, which is a sizable amount of high school students. They live in rural communities across the United States, but only 26% of rural students graduate with either an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And that's not necessarily that surprising, but they found that by this year, 80% of jobs that pay a living wage would require some kind of post-secondary attainment. And so being that they were from rural communities themselves, they wanted to help basically the people they grew up with make those college or post-secondary attainments as well so that they could have a sustainable income. The long-term goal is not just getting high school students to post-secondary attainment, but to provide generational change for these very poverty-stricken areas of Southwest Missouri that really are dependent on often seasonal work to make ends meet. So that's the goal there.
And I think it's powerful that it's not seen as a pipeline of your institution, bringing students to your institution. Has it made it difficult to sell the idea internally within your institutional structure? And how have you balanced that? And I'm asking because other places have struggled with that.
Yeah. I don't want to say that it was a struggle because we're all believers in the mission of higher education. But it was a little bit of a concern to make, because so this really is a partnership. We have these external funders that funded, I think like 2.5 advisors, and OTC funded the other 1.5. It broke down to 4 the first year. It was a concern because especially now, money is a serious issue in higher education. We've had state budget cuts a couple of times now. And so being that we're now a year in, I got news this week that those 4 high schools that we serve, while system-wide we're down in applications, I think we're averaging down 3%. Applications and students from those schools is up 18% from the previous year. So while we're really not secret OTC spies, OTC is gaining benefit just from having college and career specialists in local schools. I anticipate that this will be a cumulative effect. So again, while we're not we're actively not recruiting for OTC. They're not even trained enough to do that. Just having this focus on going to college and pursuing a post-secondary attainment of some kind is leading more students to all schools across the area. And we're even sending some students out of state. So it's paying off financially, which makes it sustainable in the long term, while that's not our stated goal.
And that's powerful because you're also benefiting those other institutions of higher ed in the region that also need and are concerned about the numbers, right? And so
exactly, yeah, and they don't even know that they should be thanking us.
That's right. So you need to talk with them. They need to be chipping in on more college advisors there. So Paige, as a student success advisor, you're right there on the front line, and you also had your time in College Advising Corps. And tell us how the world shifted for you and your work and your students in March, late March, April with COVID and that. What happened then, and what did you all do?
So it was definitely a whirlwind of a time. I had a college tour planned to go to Mizzou for my 8 students who were going to go there, who are there right now in the fall. And it was a Thursday that we got the news that our tour for the next day had been canceled. It was March either 13th or 14th. And first I was very upset about that. So that was what I was focused on, just like that plan. It was the day before we went on spring break. And 6 of the 8 students who were Mizzou bound had never even been on campus. So this was going to be like the most important trip for them. You've got to get a feel for the campus and make sure that that's the place where you need to be. And so my students were very upset, and so was I. And then we went on spring break. We were off for a whole week. I actually went on vacation to Texas, and I was like halfway there. Then they started talking about possibly shutting down the state borders. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. So after we got through that week, it was trying to figure out, what are we doing? School is shut down. We still have 2 months of school left. There are still the most important steps for the students in their college journey. Like, we've got to figure out what to do. And so the first thing I did was communicate with my school staff and just say, like, hey, can I call these people? Can I call everybody, make sure I can get a hold of them, and just kind of build a plan from there. So I was able to reach out to all of my senior parents, just say, hey, I'm going to make a phone number that's in your area code. I'm going to be contacting you and your students. Like, is that okay? Because the most important part of my work is working with parents, and got all positive responses. So we did some research on how to get, another phone number, because you don't want the kids to have your cell phone number. And so made a Google Voice account and just started texting. I sent text to all the kids. I kind of broke it up into, the first one I sent out was very personalized to that student, see where they are, how they're doing, how their life has been affected, do they need any resources, things like that. And then as the students got familiar with that and I was able to keep up my communication, I would focus on mass text for deadlines and just making sure that they weren't missing anything. And then just kind of check-in text. So especially for my high flyer students who I knew didn't need any additional help with financial aid. They had already gotten their financial aid award letters. They'd already sorted out all of their money and their dorm and all of that. Just say, hey, how are you doing today? How are you feeling about, going to Missouri State? Or how are your plans for Mizzou? Or just, have you met with your advisor? Have you had your Zoom session? Just checking in on all of those little things that we would have done in the school year. So for my mindset, it was keeping the timeline as strict as possible to what I would be doing in person, because I know that all of those things still have to be done. But without me being there in person, I was hoping that the students would be okay with the shift, making sure I was communicating clearly, because, you can read text, in a different way and all of those things. So the biggest thing was just using that texting, because, students don't really check their email. Doesn't matter how many times you tell them, they're not going to open it. They don't even use their computers. I know our school district had a lot of trouble trying to get students to still do their coursework. That was a big deal because we don't have internet access down here. Even my cell phone does not work here, but 40 minutes north where I live is perfectly fine. Just cell signals were up in the hills because we're near the lake. So internet access was a huge, huge challenge. We were working on getting hotspots for our students because they didn't even have basic tools at home. School wasn't even the focus. It was parents lost their jobs. They were in the tourism industry, just not able to work. So it was a little crazy there for a minute, but that texting the students and keeping them accountable, but while also being supportive, was hands down the lifesaver for this whole situation.
And so thinking about your program, and it's clear that when COVID hit, you already had those connections. Steve, is this program focused, or Paige, when do you start with students, and what's the caseload size, and when do you stop working with them? So what's sort of the structure of how you all have designed this program?
So initially, we started a year ago, and actually a couple months late. So these 4 embedded high school advisors got started in the middle of October, so they were behind. So initially, we were just trying to make contact with all of the seniors. They each have, on average, like 150 seniors in their high school class. One of our high schools is larger, and so they're sharing an advisor with one of the schools that's smaller. So it breaks down to about 150 to 200 each is their caseload. But essentially, we've now expanded to working with the underclassmen as well. So it's more like one advisor specialist to each school, and just trying to work with as many students as they can with a focus on the seniors, but to really develop that college going culture. Even with goals eventually of going down and working with the junior high as low as 8th grade, just to start having those conversations, to get started on all those post-secondary milestones on the way to a post-secondary attainment.
And what are your thoughts on handing off your seniors? Do you work with them through graduation, through summer melt? How long do you work with them?
Yeah, well, this year is weird. So our graduating class is the class of 2020, which they made some changes. Some decided to put their post-secondary attainment on hold. So right now, our plan was to work with them until we handed them off to their college advisors. But we're planning on following up with that senior class of 2020 basically until they decide to go back. So we're probably going to spend the next year doing follow-up work with them to help them get wherever they want to go. But yeah, the program is designed to be a warm handoff to a college advisor. So at OTC, that will function, since we're moving to a proactive advising model. Any students coming to us will be a warm handoff, but otherwise we're going to stay with them, helping them with financial aid verification, their college orientation up until they're in their freshman year at their college.
So when you're thinking about the schools that these students will attend, and I know it's a broad, you'll have some going out of state, some staying in, some going to small schools. Do you find that most of those rural higher ed institutions have an advisor to do the warm handoff too? So that's something that, I'm in Appalachia, so we're in mountains too, and we're in a rural place. And what we're finding is that some of our partner higher ed institutions have a much more robust advising program. And then there's somebody that our person can call and make that sort of connection, but there are others that don't. So what's your all's landscape around that?
Yeah, I'll let Paige answer more in detail, but the feeling I get is that most colleges do have a rather reactive advising model, and so it is more difficult to make that warm handoff. If a student knows exactly what they want to do, we can hand them off to a departmental advisor, which I think is the best case scenario. But yeah, I'll let Paige respond to that one with experience.
So I've worked with most of the Missouri schools now for 4 years. So I kind of have a good idea of how they work and what resources they need to go to. I am kind of one of my previous counselor that I worked with called me a hand holder. I don't think that's true. I think that I just help in all of the ways. That's how I would put it, I think. But I will make sure to find out the information. Like, it's my personal goal to help answer for the student. Now, when it comes to things like housing and financial aid, I can answer most of those questions, but just because I'm well versed in FAFSA and how all of that works. But in terms of when it comes to things like housing or making sure they're meeting with their advisor, directing them to the department, like admissions and things, is usually where I go. When I first meet with students in school, if we have a question or an issue with an application or something, what I will do is I will have the student sit in my office and we'll close the door, and I will call the school and put them on speaker. I'll have the student tell me their questions beforehand, and I'll ask them on the phone so that the answer can be given to both of us. But about halfway through the year, like January, February, if we still have questions, I will make the student call and do the talking and put them on speaker so we can both hear it, even if I know the answer sometimes, because it's also kind of a lifestyle change. You know, students usually have parents who are able to help them and, you know, find information, all of those things. And now the student has to kind of be a little bit more adult and be self-advocating and try to find those answers. So I also help them learn how to do that research. I'll do presentations where we'll go through the college website and how to find all of these different things, you know, where are the admissions requirements, where are the scholarships, just so that they also know. But I am there 100% of the time to help them through that process too, even if it's a slow walkthrough. So, you know, there are definitely some admissions offices that were a lot easier to work with than others this year. Everything was just so chaotic. So it was a different response from colleges than I had received in the past, which is understandable. It wasn't anything, you know, really negative. It was just trying to navigate all of these new rules, all of the financial aid changes, because most of, I would say 85% of my students are full Pell eligible that were in the class of 2020 out of the 167 that I had. So that was probably the thing that I had to hand off the most, was just having them make sure that their financial aid package didn't change because costs went up. There were more money available in grants and scholarships and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that, and I love, Stephen, your reactive versus proactive advising at the colleges. And I know on our own Berea College campus over the last 10 years, there's been a real streamlining of making sure that incoming students were served immediately and even parents were engaged, but it is difficult, right? So if there's folks listening, or if you guys know of colleges that have just done a phenomenal job of having that handoff from admissions to an advisor, we'd love to talk about that more detailed. I think it'd be a great episode for us to dig into. So Paige, I want to ask you this question, and pretend Stephen's not there. If you're thinking about your work, what would you say, if you were designing and money wasn't an option, the ideal caseload would be, considering if your caseload was rural, first gen, low income students?
I would say between 75 and 100. My very first year I had 96 seniors. My second I had 80. Last year I had 167, give or take. There are some weird circumstances here at Reed Spring. And this year I have 95 actually. So there was a 70 student shift. I had 19 juniors graduate as a junior last year. So this class lost 19 students, and we'll have another 19 graduating at semester. So I'll be down to, like, you know, 75. It's kind of crazy. So I think smaller is better, because that gives you more opportunities to meet with the students one-on-one, but not just, oh yeah, come into my office, we're going to meet, we're going to help you apply, but to actually get to know them. I think that's the biggest part of advising, is being personal. You know, you've got to make it relatable to a student. Student A and student B are never the same. So meeting them at their level, realizing their needs. You know, most of my students, we use like a barrier system. So if they're high barrier and low barrier, those are the kids who are probably not first generation, good ACT, good GPA, have parental support, have goals, know a bit of what they're going to be doing. And high barrier are going to be almost the opposite of that. You know, first generation, have no idea, don't know any post-secondary options. And most of my students are high barrier. So when you have a caseload like that, you know, you really have to be flexible. Even if I could know everything in the world and I would still not be able to just know that, but also how to make it relatable and understandable to my students, because they come from such a range of backgrounds. So I would say between 75 and 100, just to make sure that you're doing the best job you can as an advisor.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I get. And it's always interesting, right? We always think about our ideal, and then often we have to think about our funding model. And I worry in our own work that sometimes the funding model and that conflict, and how do you balance that, right? So that's really helpful, because we also have to make this cost effective and serve enough students, right? So it is a continual struggle that we face in our work too, is thinking what's the ideal caseload. we do find that when we systemize things, you can handle a larger caseload. So the barrier piece that you're talking about, or is there ways, Stephen, you're doing all, I know you're training this week too. You're all training new advisors this week. So thank you for taking the time. Is there ways that you've found to have some efficiencies by either using the same tools or working across multiple schools?
Yeah, so we don't have a CRM as the college, so we have started using HubSpot. So we started off using a giant Excel spreadsheet, and it got to have so much information that it crashed when we opened it. So we stopped using that. We started using HubSpot, which is essentially like a Salesforce online CRM, and we paid for just a couple of upgrades and use it for our student tracking now. But we initially, when we started segmenting, that's like dividing up students to try to highlight those high barrier students so we can provide everyone with the help that they need. We divided into, so there was high and low barrier, and then there were 4 categories. There was 4-year college bound, 2-year college bound, trade school, and military service. And so you had high and low barrier with each of those. And then you had like a workforce category for students that had no intention of going to college. And we realized that 9 categories was far too many. So this year we have college going. Everybody that's intending to go to college is either high or low barrier. And then we have military and workforce, and that's it, just to keep it simple. Because if you're going to any kind of college or trade school, you need to do the same things. So it doesn't make sense to break it up into 4-year and 2-year and VOTEC or anything like that. Yeah, so just trying to simplify things to use the same system. Our 4 advisors down around the Branson area are co-located. And since the pandemic, we've spent a lot more time online together, sharing ideas and coordinating our events together. And that's been an interesting model in that it's not just one advisor working in isolation, it's a team of people that are helping each other out. So I think that has helped us be more efficient overall.
Yeah, I'm sure that spreadsheet was big with all those categories and all that information. I do think that, and we struggle with that too. How do we keep the data and do what we need to do? Yeah, it's how do you systemize it, right? Is a big piece of this. So when we're, Paige, you spoke about the students that graduated in 2020, and I'm also thinking about those that will graduate next year that are entering their senior year. So have the 2 of you all thought about how your program, is there going to be unique challenges you're expecting for those incoming seniors? Well, I guess they're in because they've been in school for about 2 weeks now. So what's your all's big picture perspective on making sure that the seniors get what they need, and how do you individualize that?
I think the biggest thing is being prepared. Before we even got in school, I swore up and down that the very first thing I was going to do was get my students' cell phone numbers, because last year I had to have friends text them. I had to call parents, have them text them, call coaches, teachers, whatever, to get the phone number. So because we could go virtual at any point. So I think one advantage is that we've done this before, so we're going to be way more prepared. Like Steve mentioned, we worked together as a team. I mean, we had only been working together for 5 or 6 months, and we knew each other, we met all the time, but it wasn't like a true partnership. And that was something that we really fostered over the summer. So I think that we have a lot better resources and we're prepared now. And so, trying to do it as normal as possible, making sure that they're still on that timeline, but just being able to let them know in advance, hey, I might be texting you. I don't have school on Mondays. We went to a 4-day school week. So I was like, you're going to get texts from me on Mondays. I know we don't have real school, but, just so I can do the things that I need to do with them. And I think that is going to be the biggest thing, is just being prepared. And I feel like, this is the start of my 3rd week. So I feel like I've already been able to set that foundation, luckily. So now I'm ready. We can go virtual if we need to. It's not like we're going for spring break and just leaving and never coming back.
And from a project perspective, we front loaded our key priorities to the front part of the semester, just hoping we would get a few weeks in person with our students. So preparing for college applications, meeting one-on-one with students and doing class presentations, and preparing for the FAFSA, or if we make it to October, actually doing those one-on-one FAFSA meetings. So trying to front load our work has been our tactic for this year. for better or worse, the seniors this year, it's going to be their normal senior year. So trying to find ways to roll with whatever happens has been our approach.
We do have a few questions in the question box or the chat box. I've never understand why there are two boxes, but there are. So I'm going to go through those. But folks, if you all have questions or thoughts, please, put those out there for us. So we had a question, Steve, around the model. They say it's an awesome model. Could you offer more information on the genesis of the program and how you went about building the plan, the partnerships, the idea, and how the funder was engaged and the schools were engaged in that? So back to the thought process of the partnership.
Yeah, so this came about with 10 years of solid relationship building in the area before we ever got started. So our Table Rock campus was in existence working directly with these high schools for 10 years before we attempted this. I come from the college advising program at OTC, so I worked my way up through academic advising there, and then eventually became the coordinator of advisor training and development. That was when I was recruited for this program. So I kind of came about it from a strategic point of view. As an advisor myself, it's all about relationships. This is 100% a relationship building program. And so when I was looking for advisors to recruit to my team, they had to be able to do two things very well. They had to be able to build relationships with anyone and everyone, from students to parents to school administration to each other. And they also had the maybe far rarer trait of being able to follow through with data, because if you don't document the meetings, then we can't show that it's working. So in setting out on this project, it very much has always been number one priority is relationship building. Number two is follow through on documenting these meetings that you're going to be having. The funder was so this is the most involved funder I've ever even heard of, which is not a bad thing. Normally you're like, ew, that sounds terrible, but they really care about not just the success of the program, but also about rural students. And so as we've gone along over this last year, if something didn't work, they adapted and they listened to us. Eventually we got to the point where they were meeting, was it once a week or once a month? I don't remember, once a week with our our embedded high school advisors. This was after the pandemic. And so they got direct input about what was working and what wasn't working and what was needed. And RUDED took action immediately. They were involved in the hiring process. So this hiring process, Paige, maybe you should tell your side of the story of this, but it was representatives from 4 high schools, the OTC team from 2 different campuses, and the funder were all, so we had a hiring team of like 16 or 17 people, and multi-level interview process and a formal interview. So we started with a mixer where everybody got to walk around. This was pre-pandemic, got to walk around and talk to each other. And then second level was the more formal interview. So our school partners were involved in all of that, and our funder was involved in all of that. So it very much was a partnership, and everybody got their voice, and it was all taken very seriously. And I think that worked very well, but viewing this as a whole bunch of relationships, I think has led to the success of the program.
And that's amazing. And I appreciate you sharing the long-term piece of it, right? That I often think, and I've done this work 25 years now, right? And sometimes I'm thinking about, okay, should I spend time going to this meeting and meeting these new people? And, is it going to give me impact, right? Where if I stay and I do something else and work on this other program, but you invested a lot of time and energy, or somebody did, in this before it ever became a program. And so it is that long-term commitment. I think we sometimes forget about that piece.
Yeah, it's very much a team effort. It hasn't been one person building relationships. It's been all of us building relationships together, because without those, we're not making any impact.
And designing the program together. It seems like it was really designed. So one question I have for you as you thought about the program design, and I know one of your outcomes is the military and workforce, and as well as college. We find there's tensions often between folks who think they're worried about the workforce because they're worried about the community thriving, right? But they're also wanting kids to get a college degree. And sometimes there's a tension there. Do you all talk about that tension with your local partners? How do you sort of deal with that?
We do. So we try to have some community involvement as well. The Branson area Chamber of Commerce and kind of their county and city governments. It's very much, did you call it an industry or an entertainment industry or a tourism industry? It very much is a seasonal, people have jobs from like April to October, and then they're laid off and they draw unemployment. A large percentage of the population is driven by that tourism industry, and that is a problem. There's economic disparities, and it's an economic lack of health for that entire area. So the city and county governments and the industry employers are very much interested in some kind of post-secondary attainment, because that then keeps the economy healthy. It provides a better style of living for the people, their neighbors, and it will lead to health of the area long term, which is what everybody is interested in. So it's beneficial for individuals, for their families, but it's also good for the local economy. So as a technical and community college, promoting the technical education, you're not interested in going to college, that's fine. While you're in high school, do some career center stuff, just get a certificate and become a welding specialist, or learn to do a particular trade, whether it's mechanical drafting or whatever. The industry is there. It's begging for students to be trained in these high wage jobs, and they don't require very much education. A lot of it you can complete before you're out of high school. So partnering with industry and the technical school to offer those to students that otherwise wouldn't consider it has been an important part of this project.
And so Paige, as you're meeting with a student, a junior, or even like someone younger, and they're thinking about what they want to do, how do you work with them to make sure they're aware of the possibilities, that the world is open to them? Because I grew up in a rural place, and honestly, I thought that my world was real small, right? I only knew teachers had college degrees and doctors. And if I wanted to go to college, I had to be one of those two things. So how do you make sure they're making informed choices in the world and they understand how big the world is?
So it's different with every student, but I pretty much follow a standard method of practice. So the very first thing is I ask them what they're interested in. We also have the Gibson Technical Center here that's partnered with our high school. It's just down the street. So we have everything from computer programming to EMT classes to nursing, lower level nursing levels. So I had a student last year who graduated with an EMT certificate, and she's working full-time in an ambulance district. So first thing I ask them is, what they want to do. And if they don't know, I'm like, that is perfectly fine. We use Missouri Connections. They have a specialized quiz that students will do, and it puts them into one of 6 categories. And that kind of, based on their scores, will tell them, hey, these are the kind of jobs here. Is that something that you're interested in? And they'll pick, let's say like auto mechanic. They're really good with their hands. They're like tactiles. And so we'll look into, well, what do you have to do to be a mechanic? Like, can you just stay at your uncle's shop and, where you already work part-time? Or would it be better for you to get your A certification? Is there a place that you can go for maybe a year just to get that done? So we always start with the goals, like the big ideas, like, what you want to do. In this area, you'll hear a lot of like veterinarians, vet tech, nursing, and things like that. And especially when it comes to the medical field, one thing I always do is, the medical field is not just nurses and doctors. You've got respiratory therapists, you've got occupational therapy, all of these lower level jobs that you can go to school for 2 years, get a certification, come out making about $50,000, work in that area for a little bit and establish yourself, make sure that you like it. And then, you could potentially get funding from your employer to go to school and pursue that higher education. You don't always have to go straight for the RN. You can get your ASN and work at a nursing home, or, there's all these different paths. So that's something that I'll explore with students too, once they kind of figure out what area they would like to be in. Another thing that's important is talking about like their ACT and GPA, since that is so important for those college-bound students. Sometimes I'll have a student who will come in with a 2.2 GPA who wants to be a nurse, has never taken the ACT. And it's also having those real conversations like, hey, that's really aspirational. You want to be a nurse. I'm going to do everything that I can to get you there. I just want you to know that, you know, going in, your GPA is a little bit lower than being able to get into a four-year school. And that's about the time that I present all of those options like, hey, OTC is right down the street. You know, that's a perfect place for you to start out. You know, get your GPA up because they won't look at your high school stuff anymore. Could have had a bad year. You could have messed around. You could have not cared. There are tons of variables. You know, just because you have a 2.0 GPA doesn't mean that you're not smart. So it's just having all of those personalized conversations, making those beginning explorational steps, and then branching out and making sure that they can get where they need to go and following through with that.
Yeah, I think that I appreciate that. The piece that they don't have to get to their final place right away. That career is ever evolving. There are a couple of specific questions around, you mentioned one assessment that you use, that's a state piece. Is there any other inventory tools or any other tools that you all use in your program that you would recommend other than the one that the Missouri one you mentioned?
Oh man, I'm trying to think of the name.
All right, if you think about it, we'll type it in the chat bar, right? Folks.
I've got a couple of links. Is it one that we share, Paige?
Yes.
Is it Road Trip Nation?
Something like that. And there's also like Big Future College Board.
Yes,
Yeah.
the College Board one, College Board has some really good tools on that. So yeah, if we can think about those, that would be helpful. We are going to send these notes out, and if there's any links we want to share. So, you know, thinking about the students that we have now that we're working with and over this next year, what sort of keeps you up at night as you think about what our current seniors and our current college freshmen that you're advising? Any worries or thoughts that you're holding that keep you up at night about them and their success?
One of the main things right now with the pandemic is that most of my students are still working. They're working in restaurants, they're working at Walmart, they're working at Silver Dollar City on the weekends. One of my biggest worries is that the students are going to get caught up in the workforce and not follow through with their goals to go to college because they're thinking about the right now. You know, right now is so crazy and so tumultuous that they are having a hard time seeing into the future. And so I had a few students who I had worked with all year last year that deviated from their college going path and decided to stay in the workforce. I had a student with a 25 ACT and like a 3.6 or so who was going to go to UMSL, the University of Missouri St. Louis, and he ended up staying at his full-time job at Walmart because his parents lost their jobs. And so not saying that the workforce is bad by any way, you know, the students are getting their first start in life, but it's very hard to go back to school once you've stopped. And if there's not someone who's in a position like I am, where I work so closely with the students and helping them get their goal, they might not know where to look. They might forget where to look, and they might just never find that motivation or have someone who's there pushing them like, hey, you can go to school and, you know, go to class and those things. So that's the biggest worry I have, because right now they're meeting their current needs and they're not planning fully for their future right now.
Yeah, and that's mine too. You said that so eloquently. That's sort of what keeps me up at night too, that exact same thing. Steve, what about you, thinking about this program and thinking of it from you wanting this program to work, and that, what are you worried about as far as with the students that we're serving now?
My concern is that gap year that some of them are choosing to take, that they'll get derailed. I mean, the world is changing, and people are saying that some of the changes that are happening are going to be permanent. And I think there's a lot to be gained from an in-person college experience. But as we were kind of discussing before the session began, we're noticing a lot of students are moving to online. And I hope that they continue to see that as an option. If their program is something that can be done online, it really does open up the door for staying in their communities and continuing to better their communities. That is a long-term goal of this project, is to institute systemic change in these poverty-stricken areas. But I don't know what is going to happen with students that are now trying to do college for the first time amidst the craziness that's happening nationwide. I don't know what seniors are going to do this year. I hope that with these dedicated advisors, that they have positive relationships built with, that they'll see a path forward, and that's what we're hoping to provide them this year.
Yeah, I think that caring adult, caring educational advocate is so much more important now than it was even a year ago. And I too I get frustrated when people talk about gap years, because I think that's something that folks with lots of income can actually make happen for their children. But if you're close to poverty or middle class, a gap year is just not realistic. So thinking about the work that we do and how our role is to actually ensure and to support these young people, if you're giving suggestions, like one suggestion to somebody who's doing college access and success, either as an advisor or somebody who's running or wanting to run a program, what's something that you would recommend they do now to support kids and to support the work?
For me, it's always going to come down to relationships. If you're wanting to start this program, get in front of your high school partners now. If you work with a post-secondary institution, talk about the success of programs like this across the country in increasing enrollment, providing money so that it could be funded. If you're in a program like this, the world is a weird place. Don't drop the ball on meeting one-on-one with students. They are also frightened and unsure of the future, and even just you being in front of them and acknowledging, hey, this is all crazy, let's come up with a plan together, that's enough to motivate them to continue with their goals. So at whatever step in the process you're in, don't worry about numbers so much as building relationships and continuing that work that way.
Mine would be having a passion for change and a passion about post-secondary work. It's so important. I mean, you could put almost anybody in this position, but their impact is not going to be that great if they don't have the drive to help these students. I mean, you're going into, most of us, not really growing up rural, at least for me. I mean, I grew up in Springfield, and I have a 40-minute drive to Reed Spring, and I had never heard of Reed Spring, like New Madrid, until I got this job. And you're putting yourself into a community that you're unfamiliar with. You're going to be, different. You're the outsider. And so having that passion and that focus to really follow through and really change the lives of these kids. I mean, you're changing their entire trajectory. It's shaping the rest of their lives. But it's not just about one student. It's about their siblings and their cousins and, students who come to this school 15 years down the road. Everybody wants to help change the world, but having that passion to do something that will help a student, go off to college, return to their hometown, start their business here, start their, journey as a teacher themselves, just bringing that back to the community and really enriching it. I mean, this is life-changing work. So you've got to have a passion, and you've got to do it right, do it for the kids.
Yeah, I appreciate both those comments. And when I think about the action step too, I think it's also reminding us to agitate and continually bring up rural kids and the importance of rural college access and success. And so as there's federal legislation or policy or funders that fund work, say, hey, what about the rural places, right? How do we continue to put rural kids in the center? Because if we're not the ones having those and bringing that up in every conversation, students will be left behind, right? So I want to thank you guys for being with us. And we will send out the information and the link to this webinar. And there's been some great resources typed in the chat. So if you do have assessments or inventory tools or websites that you like, add it to the chat box, and we'll include that when we send out the information. And then Sam, I think you have the information on the next piece. And so it's great to see you guys, but I was hoping I would have gotten to meet you all back in April of 2020 at the Rural College Access and Success Summit, because you guys were going to present there. So Sam has a save the date for the 2021 College Access and Success Summit. And we made the really difficult decision to take it online. We're hoping that there'll be a lot of in-person meetings by April of actually, I think you've got the wrong year, Sam. It's actually 21. So it's April 26th through the 30th of 2021. We hope that we'll be able to be in person, but what we're also realizing is talking to our partners at colleges and school districts is that travel is going to be greatly restricted. And so even if we're in person and everything's good, our bosses are not going to let us travel. So we are going to do a Rural College Access and Success Week that week in April. And it will be, I think we're starting around like Eastern time, noon to 2:30, something like that, for 5 days. And so please join us. We'll be sending that information out. And then our next conversation that we're having is October 7th. And we're going to talk about the power of libraries and how libraries are in all of our rural places, and they're an untapped resource for college access and success. So October 7th, power of libraries, and then April 26th through the 30th, of 2021, the Rural College Access and Success Week. And our partners there is Campus Compact in New Hampshire. And so that week will also have a focus on service. And I know, Paige, you were in the College Advising Corps. So many people have done service, and that's how they do the college access work. So I think that's it for us. Thank you guys for joining me. It was great to meet you, and I look forward to seeing you in person.